We've got a full house here, and that shows that you all know Danielle and what a good job she's going to do here. Welcome, I'm Bill Brooks. I'm the Executive Director, and this is the last in a series that started last summer about hidden treasures of the Sheldon Museum. And this is inspired by the fact that for years we've had a model railroad exhibit, which is in the adjoining room. And that exhibit includes photographs, historic photographs of trains. So we invite you to go into the room after the presentation. The trains will be running, and the large images of the train photographs are there. Now this is only, the exhibit is only one of 3 current exhibits here at the museum. So in this room and downstairs that you pass through on the way up the steps is an exhibit that also, all the exhibit ends on Saturday. So this exhibit is called Conjuring the Dead. So all these figures were dreamed up by a spiritualist. The drawings here and downstairs are the photographs. And I invite you to visit this exhibit today or before we close on Saturday. The third exhibit is called The Animals Are Innocent. It's a wonderful, colorful exhibit that belies the title, but it's ceramics and animal portraits by Dana Simpson. And her theme is the animals are innocent and what's happening to them because of climate change. So I also invite you to visit that. And one of the ceramic pieces that she created, a large decorative teapot, is being raffled. And it's a good, we don't have that many buyers so far, or raffle takers, so your chances are fabulous. And in addition, if you aren't already, we encourage you to become a member of the museum. The single membership's of $35, the family is $50, and it's a great benefit and allows us to continue with our part-time staff of 3, which includes me, the Associate Director Mary Manley, who's over here in the corner, and our archivist, Eva Garcelin-Hart, who's in the rear, and she was the curator of the Conjuring the Dead exhibit. And included, I see one of our trustees is here, Lucinda Cockrell is in the back, and we can't operate the museum without our trustees who are all volunteers. So Danielle, amongst other things, she's a trustee of the Sheldon, and she's been the president of the board of directors. She's going into her 3rd year. Many of you know her because she's the archivist at the special collections of Middlebury College, and she's also an artist. If you've attended some of our events, whether they be the Pops concert or other events, she acts as an artist and has done a lot of images that we then raffle off. But her background, which many of you may know, but she's more importantly now, you probably know her or you don't know her for 2 reasons. She is a participant and a winner in primitive biathlons. So she dresses up, goes out in the wild with a musket, often wearing a coonskin cap, and is on wooden snowshoes, and she competes. And amongst the women participants, evidently they, correct me if I'm wrong, segregate the women from the men. She's a winner. And there's been several articles written about her. So it's powder, rifles, and muskets. Anyway, but she's a winner, and the other, she's a log roller. She started off rolling logs in the Middlebury pool, and she's become the coach. And her teams have won most competitions in whatever league they're in. So she's also known for her enthusiasm, which is contagious. Some descriptions are that she's diminutive, quiet, but then they also talk about her laugh. And if she wins something, she goes, yippee! So I won't go through her various credentials academically, because she's doing a great job at the college special collections, and you should go up there, but you also should come here to visit with Eva in her collection. So it's my pleasure to introduce the enthusiastic, wonderful Danielle Rougeau.
Well, now we know the danger of giving Bill Brooks access to the internet. I hope I'll also be known for a nice lecture. So thank you, all of you, for coming. What a great group. Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking Mary and Eva and Bill, the staff at Sheldon. They do a great job here, and they have supported me in this effort today. And they support all of us in all our efforts. I also particularly want to thank Larry Meyer. As Bill mentioned, he's our train engineer for the model trains, and he is a train guy. And as I got into choosing my object and deciding to talk about it, it's quite clear I really knew nothing about railroads. And it's a monstrous, interesting subject. And Larry has been a great help, so thank you very much. So my choice, as Bill mentioned, we have a hidden treasure series we've been doing. And it's not like it's my favorite object, but it's a very cool object. And when I was going through photos in the Sheldon collection and I came across this, I knew I'd seen it before. So that's part of the reason I chose it. Finding these in different places and then getting the stories from why they get to those different places, it's all a way of adding a rich texture to understanding what they're about. So for this particular image, besides the fact that it's this huge, momentous catastrophe, it intrigues me that although this came off as a kind of sudden event, that there were many variables that were steadily and surely coming together to assure that trestle's demise on that morning in May of 1893. So I want to tell this story. To do that well, I need to understand more viewpoints, and I certainly needed to understand a little bit more about the railroad and its history. So my initial thoughts is, where is that? What did the trestle look like before it collapsed? What made it collapse? And what are those kids doing there? What is the likelihood of kids getting onto a half-submerged wrecked rail car these days? Probably nil. So where is that? Oh, there's my image without my title. There you go. So isn't it a beautiful image? Fantastic. You got the 5 little boys in the middle. So this is an 1853 map of Middlebury, Madison County, produced by Presdy and Edwards. And I'll close in so that you can see the detail that I want to show. Maps are wonderful in that when I'm walking around, I can't see distances. I don't understand where things are placed unless I get that bird's eye view. So maps are wonderful in understanding the trestle, where it was located, and how it was moving through town was very helpful for me to understand the complexities of this wreck. Before I move to the close-up, as a matter of information, you'll notice that these beautiful little vignette drawings on the sides, those are there because for the publishers to produce these maps, they needed to have subscribers. So the top, oh, wrong one. I want the pointer. There it is. Okay. That top image is actually Jason Davenport, who had a foundry and machine shop on Merchants Row. And the one below is the Addison House, or the Middlebury Inn. That's part of the Congo Church. But what happens is when these maps get produced, all these places are listed, properties are listed, but if your name appears, it's because you paid to be there. So that's why they're there. So here's a close-up of the map. So in my mind, and this is why it's really good for me to see maps, I think of Otter Creek going north and south, but I think, oh, the trestle must be going east and west, but of course it doesn't. It does this beautiful little jig right through there, so it's going straight north and south. What you should also notice is that is the depot. In 1853, our depot was right at the end of the trestle. So this is the Burleigh map of 1886. Aerial photography was in existence at this time, but the drawn maps allowed artists and subscribers to highlight particular features. You'll notice, sorry, my pointer. So you'll notice these little legends at the bottom. So there are actually numbered places in this map. So in a closer look, you can see, oh, sorry, what is that? There it is. That's the trestle. So that's what the trestle at least looked like in terms of an artist rendering before it collapsed in 1893. You'll also see there's a little passenger train coming right up to go through. And the little buildings at the end, and this little house here, I think those are all also railroad houses. So, yes, and then, and the depot. So there's the train coming, there's the trestle, and then this number 11, that is the Central Vermont Railway Station. So you still see the depot at the end of the bridge. Within 5 years, however, Middlebury would suffer the Great Fire of 1891, and the depot would be moved to Seymour Street. Weight made the trestle collapse. What I've come to understand, putting this talk together, is that every advancement in any part of the railroad industry necessitated improvements with new designs in every other part of the industry, and every single advancement translates to weight, speed, money, and more weight. So at the bottom of it all are the rails. So a history of rails is important to understand. Railways have existed since the 1500s in other parts of the world. The first railway in America was built in 1764 in Lewiston, New York. It was powered by horses, and cars were pulled on wooden rails with affixed cast iron plates. Cast iron, unfortunately, is brittle, and it breaks under heavy loads. So in 1820, an inventor named John Birkinshaw, patented a metal rolling technique to make wrought iron, which is referred to as a ductile material. What that means is it can deform under pressure without losing its toughness or breaking, and is far more dependable than cast iron. It could also be manufactured in longer lengths of rail, which vastly improved the dependability of the tracks. The fewer welds or splices, the fewer weak points. In fact, iron-strapped wooden rails were used on all American railways until 1831. As track technology was improving, so was engine technology, meaning the development of the steam engine, and as the steam engine became more powerful and faster and heavier, iron-strapped rails were not up to the task. They were easily jumped by engines and cars, and would occasionally develop something called snakeheads. That strap could come loose at one end or the other. And when a weighted car or train would go over it, it would make it curl, and metal would come right up and puncture the bottom of the passenger car. The coal cars didn't mind, but it would be a little upsetting for the passengers. It was U.S. engineer and shipbuilder, that's not Robert Livingston Stevens, but there was a U.S. engineer and shipbuilder, Robert Livingston Stevens, who in 1830 invented the inverted T rail and rail spike. That's that right there. Also known as the flat bottom rail. It is now the dominant rail profile in worldwide use today. As the protection of iron became faster and more affordable, solid rails, flat bottom rails, replaced composite wood and iron rails, and the railroad industry experienced an explosive growth from the 1830s through the 1840s and 50s. In 1857, Robert Forster Mushet, a British metallurgist and businessman, was the first to produce solid steel rails. The Iron and Steel Society consider Mushet a steel hero, a man who took out about 20 patents between 1859 and 1861, for the manufacture of alloys of iron with titanium, tungsten, and chromium. Suffice to say, Mushet steel was much stronger than iron and able to be rolled in longer lengths. Steel eventually replaced iron and remains the industry standard. By the 1940s, the U.S. could produce steel rails as long as 78 feet. That means a smoother ride and fewer structural weaknesses. The general rule is that the heavier the rails and the track work, the heavier the trains it can carry, and the faster those trains can travel. There are what are called light rails used for sidings and other applications, but the vast amount of track in the U.S. is actually 132 pounds per yard. What you can see here is, you see these numbers? These are cross sections of rail, and they're rated for those weight per yard. So these would be light sidings. You can see them getting taller. And then at the end, that's the 132. That's what's being used on all rails now, well, most rails in the United States now. The upgrading of the rail translates not only to moving additional tons of freight, but also to additional stress on rail's infrastructure, namely bridges and trestles. You keep adding weight, it's all about the weight. The railway beds also have become highly engineered to accommodate all this weight because the trains are crowding at greater speeds and are significantly heavier. So you'll notice, you can see just, it looks like the rails are sitting right in the dirt, and here they're raised and designed on the supports. So much higher, accommodating the wheels and the weight of the trains. So railroad beds, track beds have become highly engineered to accommodate trains that travel at greater speeds. The flat bottom rail, among other factors, has led to the refined design for the wheels. The earliest rail cars sported standard straight-sided wheels. So the earliest composite wood and iron rails featured these L-shaped rails to hold the wheels on the track. They were not very dependable and they were difficult to maintain. So one of the goals for a well-designed wheel is to reduce drag, which translates to faster travel and less wear on the rails. Just as rail transitioned from iron to steel, so did wheels. Not only are the steel wheels stronger, they can handle greater load capacities. A 36-inch steel wheel weighs about 900 pounds. So on an 8-wheel coal car, it rolls around on about 3.5 tons of steel. So rail cars are designed to carry specific types of freight, whether that freight is livestock, human people, passengers, cargo, whether it's refrigerated, possibly heated, covered or not. Specific to the Trestle Collapse of 1893, I'll talk more about the background and the development of coal cars. Again, I want to thank Larry Meyer. He found me a great book on Tuesday. He said, you need to see this book. It's a big, thick book, like this, beautifully published. The title, Coal Cars, the First 300 Years. Who knew? And I have to say, I probably would not have been interested, but it is fascinating. It is fascinating. I just love it. So, thank you again, Larry. So an overview. Coal cars are sometimes called, coal cars are sometimes called gondolas, or hopper bottom gondolas. The original gondolas, the name being a spoof on the Venetian rowing boat, were simply designed low-sided wooden boxes. They had to be shoveled out by hand, a slow and labor-intensive process. As more and more freight was being moved, stations were being designed for more efficient offload, and doors on either the underside or the sides of the gondolas were added to discharge cargo, hence the hopper bottom. The bottoms could open and discharge the cargo. In general and over time, coal cars started at about 30 feet. Eventually in the 1880s through the 1970s were about 40 feet long. And currently, the coal cars are 53 feet long. As they get longer, they carry more weight. The flooring requires more design and metal and engineering, and sometimes more wheels to distribute the weight. The coal cars pictured here would have been in use in the 1880s through the early 1900s. In examining the photo, which isn't my chosen photo, it seems that the cars in the collapse were in the later vintage, which is this 1158. So pertinent information about these cars. The one on the above is an earlier car, the one below later. The top has 9 vertical supports, and I didn't realize, Larry told me, this information here gives you capacity. It gives you length, gives you empty weight, gives you capacity weight, and will also tell you how long it is. All of that figures to what it can take on a rail, and if when it's traveling, it can be accepted at a station where it's going, so it's not too heavy. So the top has 9 vertical supports. It has an empty weight of 33,000 pounds and a capacity of 60,000 pounds for a total of 47 tons of carrying weight. You have to add the content and the container itself. On the bottom, there are 12 vertical stays, an empty weight of 37,600 pounds, and a capacity of 80,000 pounds for a total of 59 tons. The length indicated is 38 feet. It is possible that the cars in the 1893 collapse could have been as long as 40 feet. For every additional foot of length on a hopper, you could add a ton of capacity. Today's hoppers are 53 feet long, and when fully loaded, they're rolling down the track at 100 tons. So if you will, notice also this mechanism here at the bottom of that rail car, which is the newer of the 2 cars. So braking systems. As cars, engines, and trains got heavier and faster, stopping them becomes more crucial, not only commercially and financially destruction of equipment or a loss of cargo, but also for safety. In 1869, George Westinghouse designed the railway air brake, which eventually led to the direct air brake system, which is fully mechanical. Each car is fitted with its own air braking mechanism, which can be activated by the engineer from the engine. Though revolutionary invention, the air brake was not universally adopted nor required. It was actually a matter of judgment for the railroads. Without automatic air brakes, the brakes had to be applied manually for each car. Hence, the brakeman is walking across the tops of these cars in whatever weather and turning the brakes by hand. So you can imagine if you're engrossed in your work and you're coming up into town. So this beautiful photograph. This is from the Sheldon collection, and probably some of you do know this, but this little mechanism right here, you can see this. It looks like a kind of clothesline, a drying rack, and it has pieces of rope coming down. Well, that ingenious little invention is called a telltale, or a bridge warning. Those simple structures were placed usually about 30 yards from each end of a bridge or tunnel, and the dangling ropes were long enough to make a sound, and that would alert the brakemen so they could get down in between the cars and get themselves out of the way before they went under bridges or other obstructions. That's 1932. Now it is possible, hopefully we didn't have brakemen in 1932, but you will occasionally find these telltales still around. So the next thing you have to think about is how, yes?
Go back to that last that vertical was still there, the summer ago?
Oh my
because
gosh.
I mentioned it to Jim Gish, what it was all about.
Oh.
And it was in a week when I mentioned it to Jim Gish that it came down. But it had been there, just the vertical part.
Yeah.
Then recently.
Yeah. So the other big factor in rolling stock is anything that's not the locomotive, it's anything rolling on the track. And the systems to connect those cars are called coupling systems. The original system style for coupling in the United States on North American Railways was called the link and pin. So the link is actually it's an oval piece of metal, and you can see that's the pin. It is a completely manual system, much like the poor brakeman. You'd have a guy having to get in between these cars as they're being adjusted in the rails on the stations, and he would have to be lining up these two parts. The link would slide in, and then the pin would be dropped in. Now that's nice and clean. It looks like it's nice straight on, but you would also run into problems like this. Because weights, lengths, and heights for trains was not not completely standard, some couplers would find this situation when they went to put their cars together. So it was a very dangerous job. I'm imagining they're probably the job list. Oh, there's another coupler opening. So these are the Janney, or the knuckle coupling, a fantastic invention by Eli Janney. It was patented in 1868. He continued to make improvements on the design up until 1877, and it remains pretty much that style to this day. Between 1877 and 1887, 38% of all railroad accidents involved coupling. Those accidents would be losing fingers, hands, being dragged under cars, or being crushed between cars. As link and pin couplers were replaced with the automatic Janney couplers, the percentage of coupling accidents dropped to 4% of all railroad accidents. And that in spite of the fact that there were a steadily growing number of railroad employees. So the first steam locomotive engine was invented by James Watts in 1789. The coal-powered steam locomotive, most prevalent in the United States in the 1840s through 1870s, which was its heyday, was called the 4 and 4, or the 440, an old-style engine prevalent that occurred for 85% of all the locomotives in operation in the U.S. You'll notice the 4x4, there are two, so 4 wheels in the front, these 2 large wheels with 2 on the other side. That names the 4x4. It was, unfortunately, by 1910, as the industry is growing, as things are getting heavier, as things are moving faster, they became obsolete and they were being replaced with much larger and heavier locomotives. The 4 and 4, which is a locomotive that was hauling the coal train through Middlebury at the Trestle Collapse, weighed about 22 tons. Compare that with the current diesel-electric locomotives that can weigh as much as 200 to 225 tons. Diesel-electric became the engine of choice once it proved to be cheaper and more reliable than steam. So, rails, wheels, cars, and engines over time. Let's look at these variables at particular times in history. In the official Railway Equipment Register of July 1904, Professor Taylor of the University of Wisconsin wrote an article, "The Capacity of Early American Freight Cars." I can't tell you how pleased I was to find that article. In 1831, the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, the B&O, required a train of 8 cars to transport 200 barrels of flour. The entire train, without the engine, which was the horse, weighed 30 tons. And that included 2 tons of passengers perched on top of flour barrels. By 1847, which is within a year of the building of the first wooden trestle in Middlebury, the B&O annual report provides these statistics for what they call the burden cars it had in service for hauling coal. It owned 163 8-wheel gondolas, each weighing 4.5 tons and able to carry 8 tons, and 37 wooden hoppers weighing 3 tons and with a capacity of 7 tons. As late as 1855, loading 9 tons in an 8-wheel coal car was considered heavy. Compare that with its 1847 progenitor, the average 8-wheel coal car of 1867, utilizing improved design and materials, weighed an additional 2 tons, 6.5 tons, and could carry an additional 3 tons, or 22,400 pounds. By 1893, with structural improvements, coal hoppers were roughly 40 feet long, weighed 15 tons empty, and had a carrying capacity of 50 tons. Fully loaded, each car had a combined weight of 65 tons, almost 3 times as heavy as the coal cars of 1867. By comparison, a loaded passenger car in 1893 would have weighed half as much, roughly 33 tons. And of that 33 tons, only half a ton was for the inhabitants in the car. To put that in perspective, the first 1848 wooden trestle was built to support 88 tons of rolling weight. Its 1860 replacement would have been built to support roughly 90 tons of rolling weight. That same trestle was supporting over 325 tons on the morning it collapsed, over 3.5 times more weight than it was built to support.
The miracle of that, they got over beforehand.
It is amazing. So, there's a wonderful article on the Sheldon website. It's called "The Old Trestle Was Site of 1893 Train Wreck." It was written October 30th, 2007, and in speaking with Eva, we're fairly sure that Executive Director Jan Outlaws wrote the story. It's a very good story. I will make it shorter, just so we can go through, but what the story is the wreck happened at 4:40 in the morning on Friday, May 5th, 1893. It was so loud that it woke sleeping residents on South Street. Spectators gathered quickly to view the devastation. The wooden railway trestle had collapsed under the weight of a heavily loaded 20-car coal train. The engine, boxcars, and 5 coal cars had successfully crossed, but as the following coal cars came onto the 200-foot span, the trestle gave way. Some suspected that a car had gone off the rails and hit the edge of the bridge, causing it to collapse. From the state of the wreckage, however, it was clear that the bridge gave way all over. As it sank, it careened westward. The town's first depot had been located near the end of the crash site at the bottom of Water Street, but it had been moved in 1891 to Seymour Street. No one was hurt in the accident. The Rochford family probably came the closest. They lived in the railway company's house at the north end of the trestle. I'm guessing maybe that's that house there, that barn. After the incident, the paper said, the remains of the bridge are piled up within a few feet of their front door. A passenger train had crossed the trestle just 30 minutes prior to the collapse. The Middlebury Bridge collapse was not the first. Rumors were quickly flying around town that the wreckage would not be cleared for days because 2 other railway bridges had collapsed in Vermont the previous night, as well as a trestle in Proctorsville. In fact, the cleanup took place at record speed. By 9 a.m. on the morning of the crash, the Rutland Railroad had already sent a wrecking gang to begin the work. It was a hard wreck to get at and clear away, but by nightfall, much of it had been removed. By Saturday morning, one day after the collapse, company crews were at work rebuilding the trestle. It was said that they did not stop until it was done Sunday noon. Their work was impeded by the depth of the water. There had been very, very heavy rains, and the depth of the water in the main south channel was running at 16 to 20 feet. And of course, there's also the usual Addison clay at the bottom, which made it hard to find firm footing. By Sunday evening, trains were already passing over the new trestle. Well, wait for it. In his journal on Sunday, May 7th, Henry Sheldon wrote, trains passed over the creek on trestle after noon today. Very quick work since Friday morning when the bridge was broken. The new trestle, however, promptly collapsed again 4 days later at 6 a.m. in the morning on Thursday, May 11th, sending the engine and 1 car into the creek. Isaac Goodrow and his mother, who lived close by the bridge, were the only ones to see it go down. They were looking out the window at the time. The Rutland Railroad soon got the trestle into temporary working order, probably for passenger rail, and then took measurements for a permanent iron bridge to be erected as soon as they could get it to Middlebury. On November 26, 1893, Henry Sheldon wrote in his diary, the new railroad iron bridge is so far completed that trains cross tonight. It is still in service at the end of Water Street today. Investigations concluded that the trestle was too flimsy for the train capacities of 1893. Not a surprise if you know the histories of the trains. The trestle's breaking was merely a question of time. So the photo. As I mentioned earlier, I had seen the photo before and I thought, okay, so I need to do a little bit of research on this and figure out where I've seen it. I work at the College Archives. It had to be a College Archives guide. Also, this is a staged photo. This is I mean, these little boys are not having to sneak on the back. Somebody quickly takes a picture and they jump off and run away. They're sitting there posing, as are the other people that are around the bottom here. They're all kind of around, and these 5 little guys are posing on the end of this train. It's very likely that this photograph was taken by William Jackson, the artist. I was asking Eva, I wanted a picture of Jackson. This is the straightest face you'll ever see on William Jackson. In most of the photos, I think he's either in drag or wearing a wig. He was quite a character around town. He was a favorite with Middlebury College students. He took everybody's graduation photo. He succeeded R.A. Dean as the official Middlebury photographer in November 1887, and he retained Dean's studio, which was in the upstairs of Cobb's Block at 48 Main Street. The Great Fire of 1991 forced Jackson to move out, and at the time of the Trestle Collapse, he was operating his business in the Methodist Block at 68 and 72 Main Street, which is now 4th and Gold. So, I know I've seen the photo, and the reason, besides it's a very recognizable photo, oh, God darn it. I recognize this little guy here. There he is. I have a colleague, Joseph, who he can look at houses like people, but he also knows where they are. I see houses like people, they're floating. I don't know where they are. But I saw that face, and I knew I'd seen the face before. So do you see the resemblance? That is Percival Wilde's. The archives had received a photo album. It came from the alumni office, and it was created by Percival Wilde. It's a very small album. It has a few cyanotypes, a few regular sepia type photos, and then it has that image of the train collapse in the very front. Wilde was born in Middlebury in 1882, and in the photo, he was just shy of his 11th birthday. He was a Middlebury class of 1902. He went on to study law at Harvard, and he went on to have a very successful career as a New York City law partner. He was also a Middlebury College trustee. What's also great about the photo, and this is his album, he identifies all the kids in the photo. So, from left to right, sitting on the back of that car, we have Jimmy Calhoun, Bullfrog Calhoun, Dane Jackson, Joe Calhoun, and Percy Wilde. I wish I could tell you more. It would take more research to say where they were in town. I would love to know that information. In looking through Joanne Laneroth's History of Businesses in Middlebury, there was a Joe Calhoun and Son who had a business in Middlebury. Possibly, they're one of the sons that were in the business. So, that's my story of choosing this photo. Thank you very much. Any questions? I'd love to field some questions.
Yeah, do you know that in that trestle repair, I mean, how did they pull those cars out of the, did they just build over them, or what did they do?
Again, that's going to take more research. It's not recorded in the paper. I don't know. 16, if the water is 16 and 20 feet deep, I don't know if something like that eventually washes over the fall. I doubt it, but I don't know. I haven't been in the water. I wouldn't know.
It's amazing. I just say, you know, whenever anybody talks about extremely heavy weights,
Yes.
in my own head, I can tell you that the steamboat Ticonderoga at Sheldon Museum, she weighs 800 tons.
Oh.
So that's not, it doesn't take much of a train loaded to equal that vessel. Yeah.
That's right. So when these cars were fully loaded, you could get, because they were roughly about 40 feet long, you could get 5 loaded coal cars on the trestle at one time, and that makes the 325 tons. Yes?
What was the result of the second one that happened 4 days after the first?
Well, they got it into temporary repair, and again, that would be some great research.
What happened to the engineer and everybody?
They were all safe.
I'm surprised.
Well, no, you're right. They went into the water. We're assuming he swam. He swam to the top. I did not read about him dying in the accident. Probably passenger rail was set. One of the questions I would have would be, if this is down and it can't take coal car, all this coal has to be moved elsewhere and go around Middlebury. And that adds to time and adds to expense.
Is that the first or second train that went over?
Is this what?
The first or the second train that went over?
This is, well, the first part of the train crossed successfully. What you're seeing, and well, what you don't see as well, there are cars that sunk to the bottom of the creek, and these are the cars that were just heading onto the trestle that didn't make it, so they ended up being derailed. So this is the first accident on May 5th of 1893.
But is the engine this way or that way?
Well, we're looking north.
Right. Which way was the train
I
going?
believe that the train was going north. So, looking north, so it would have been down that way. Yes,
How much do we know about the structure of that bridge? It was a covered bridge, apparently, right?
it was a covered wooden trestle.
It was, do we know what kind of truss work it was?
Well, that's a discussion I've been having with Larry. You know, early on when trestles were built, they were just built big. The bigger they were, the more they handle. Eventually, as these weights got so incredible, bridges had to be designed. They also were starting to be made of iron. So now you're talking design, designed to take more weight. So I'm thinking probably, this was built 1860, the one that collapsed. So I don't know how much design was involved when it was put together. And of course, it was only supposed to carry 90 tons, which it had been doing since 1848. By the time this happened, it was 325 tons. So there was certainly no redesign.
But there were a lot of covered bridges before that time that had different types of truss work.
Well, yes, and in the story that Jan tells, 2 had collapsed the night before. So this was not going to be a new problem. The industry was getting big and heavy, and there was going to have to be a redesign and replacement of infrastructure. Yeah.
So to that date, there was no system of inspection or control or?
They had guys walking along the tops of the cars. They did not have OSHA.
But I mean, you know, they had a rated design capacity of the trestle, but they exceeded it
No,
by
I
3.
don't think there was.
Oh, okay.
I don't think there was a
Oh,
redesign.
I see. So they
It
did
wasn't
not-
really designed, it was just big.
It was just built.
Yeah.
Yeah, up until that point,
Explains it.
you could, if you used big pieces of wood, it would work.
Right.
Yeah, and so they did. But I don't think there was any
inspection.
analysis or structural design or those kinds of things. Once they got to the iron bridge, then they started to have, because that's got a truss structure, and that's a designed bridge, but these probably weren't designed in that sense.
Yes, Jim.
And just as a kind of a follow-up to all this, although it's not strict, really designed to be local here, anybody who really wants to learn a lot more about trains and gets a chance to go to Baltimore, B&O has just a fantastic, one of the largest railroad museums in displays of equipment and technology. And,
Well,
railroad
that Lincoln pin photo that I showed you, that's actually in a museum where you can practice yourself trying to get that connected. Yes.
But that iron trestle is basically a king post truss design.
Okay, you're speaking beyond what I know, but yes, that was certainly designed. I saw a hand. Yes, Adrian.
Where were the other 2 collapses?
I couldn't find that information. And that's what's so kind of like frustrating. You have this great story, absolutely no references. Doesn't say anything about where the information
It's
came from.
probably happening all around the country.
Well, exactly. I'm thinking it was. So this was not a new phenomenon. It had to be starting more and more. So I'm guessing that Jan Albers would have gone to, say, local newspapers where she would have been able to read about that. There are now wonderful resources where newspapers are scanned. You can search them by keyword. So I wanted to know that. I just ran out of time researching.
I just find it a little weird that there would be 3 collapses in one state within what? A 30-hour period
Yes.
maybe, and not have this been combined news story.
Other than the rail, I mean, back in those days, news didn't travel far.
Yeah.
It could
Yes.
happen, and if you were 30 miles away, you may not even know about it.
Are there pictures other than that map you showed of the trestle before it collapsed?
I haven't found one. That's not to say it doesn't exist. And that's one of those things, if you go to an archive and say you're looking for a home on a particular street, in the background, you may have a trestle. So it might show up there. But of course, 1848 is too early for photos. So
Yeah.
the one you're going to see is the replacement of 1860. Yes.
Was this covered in the local press at all?
Yes,
It was.
yes. And I think that's where Jan got her information,
Okay.
primarily for the story. Well, thank you very, very much. I'm so glad you all came.